Welcome back, guys. Hope you guys are having a wonderful afternoon. In this video, we are going to be going over the most effective and ineffective martial arts, specifically as it relates to MMA. Starting off strong, we are going to be covering judo. Now, judo is one of those martial arts where it's becoming increasingly popular these days. Judo is also one of those martial arts where it's been around for a very long time, but perhaps newer MMA fans and martial arts fanatics aren't as acquainted or knowledgeable on it. So they're just now kind of realizing how effective it really can be. And if you look at a lot of champions like Islam Makhachev, he swears by judo, especially in his earlier years when his father was training, or not father, I think it was his coach was training him. He did a lot of judo, and he uses a lot of judo in his current matchups whenever he fights. So for that reason, I am going to have to put judo in A tier. Whenever you're able to manipulate and take down someone from a standing position, you ultimately have a pretty difficult skill set to combat, especially if the person has no sort of grappling insurance policy, such as jujitsu, which we're going to get into next. So moving on, we are going to move on to, like I said, jujitsu, right? So jujitsu is absolutely essential for MMA, as I'm sure we all know by now. Pretty much anyone who doesn't have a ground game is pretty much guaranteed to lose to over 60% of anyone who is somewhat adequately decent at MMA. And we can see this in the UFC many times over. So many of our favorite champions and fighters have a jiu-jitsu base, such as Charles Oliveira, Damian Maia, and it's stood the test of time as one of those must-have martial arts for MMA, because if you don't have it, you are pretty much done for. And for that reason, I call it the insurance policy of MMA, because when stuff hits the fan and you get taken down perhaps by a superior wrestler, or even a judo practitioner, you have that insurance policy to help you get out of those situations and potentially even finish the fight down there. So for that reason, I am going to put jujitsu in A tier. Moving on, we are going to talk about combat sambo. This is another martial art that Islam Makhachev swears by. It's a martial art that honestly, in the East, if you look at a lot of these Eastern countries, primarily in Georgia, Russia, etc., this is a martial art that they swear by, and it has been incredibly effective for those who are able to master it, right? Of course, we've seen this with Habib. Although he's primarily a wrestler, he does also have combat sambo experience. And of course, Islam Makhachev as well, where he's been able to use this experience to become champion, and of course, developing his game in many other ways. But as a base, combat sambo has been clearly one of the most effective martial arts that we've ever seen, truly, as a base for MMA, because it sort of has a focus on mixing other martial arts anyway. The ability and skill of mixing martial arts is a skill in and of itself. So for that reason, I am going to have to put combat sambo in S tier. Moving on, we have Sanda. Sanda is a more unknown martial art to perhaps newer fanatics of MMA, but pretty much it originates in China, as really most martial arts do, or a decent portion of them do. And it is actually one of the more, again, underrated martial arts. I mean, we see champions like Zhang Weili or Weili Zhang. I'm not sure the order in which you say those names, but we see her be able to use her Sanda experience to again become champion. And it's one of those more underrated martial arts because not a lot of people have heard about it, not a lot of people practice it, and oftentimes people don't really have an answer for the problems that Sanda can present. But the only thing with Sanda is that it's not as popular as your jujitsu, your judo, or even combat sambo as well. So we haven't actually seen a lot of champions, really outside of Zhang Weili, use Sanda to progress any great lengths with it. But I do think if it becomes more popular to the general public, I do think that we can see it be more popular and at the same time be able to really display its effectiveness on the global scale. So for that reason, I am going to put Sanda in B tier. Moving on, we have Wing Chun, right? So Wing Chun is one of those funny ones where you either think it's great or you think it sucks, right? Like I haven't seen many people have a in-between opinion on Wing Chun. Either people are like, yeah, this is really effective, and I've used it in conjunction with other martial arts to improve my defense and my offense. Or you have people that say, yeah, this is complete, bullshito, and this really has no practical use in MMA. My opinion on the matter is that I am more so of the opinion that it's better to know it than to not know it. We can see examples, really the main example being Tony Ferguson, who has used a lot of Wing Chun techniques throughout his career. And while Tony didn't have the peak of a career that we've seen with other MMA legends, he absolutely used his Wing Chun techniques to his advantage, and it really did help him out throughout his career. But then again, we also have to remember that because it's not widely used, really, for the exception of Ferguson, we haven't had a wide enough sample size or data set to really determine whether or not this is a martial art that you know would rank highly in MMA. You know, and I simply don't see it being as effective as a Muay Thai or a boxing or something that we're gonna get into later on. So for that reason, I am going to put Wing Chun in C tier. Moving on, we have karate, right? Um, Similar to Wing Chun, it's one of those martial arts where people either hate it or they love it, in the sense that they think it's either super effective and great to know, or they hate it and they don't think that it has really any place in MMA, or people just think it isn't as effective, or you could learn something that's going to be much more worthwhile to your skill set. We've seen examples of karate champions in the UFC. I mean, Conor McGregor is a perfect example of this. His karate stance was so hard to deal with. Now, obviously, Conor had a lot of physical attributes that made that style work for him. He was very small, loose, and he had shocking power. So when you combine somebody with that archetype and build with something like karate, you have a very deadly fighter. Another example that was absolutely prolific during his peak was Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He was able to use that tricky sideways stance and sideways footwork to quickly get in and out of precarious situations. And this allowed him to hit and not get hit, which is ultimately the goal of striking, is to hit and not get hit. Right? So I don't like karate. I mean, we've seen it work, but we've also seen it be dismantled um, by a lot of other martial arts that we're going to assess here. Karate is one of those weird ones where I can't really talk trash about it, but at the same time, I can't rank it as highly as some of the other ones on this list. I certainly would not put karate on the same level as judo or jujitsu in terms of effectiveness for MMA, but it's definitely not as low as some of the other ones on this list. So it's kind of in that limbo mid-range area, in my opinion. For that reason, I am going to have to put karate in C tier. Don't kill me. Moving on, we have boxing. So boxing is undoubtedly one of the most effective bases for MMA. I mean, we've seen people like Dustin Poirier, Ilya Topuria. We've even seen people like Sergey Pavlovich at heavyweight. We've seen people like Brandon Moreno, Joshua Van at flyweight. Brandon Royval. These are all guys who have excellent boxing skills, and they've all been to the top, absolute top of their divisions. Some and most of them were champions, and it's one of those bases of MMA where if you can learn how to pair it with other bases such as jujitsu and certain kickboxing techniques as well, you can really be dangerous here. So for that reason, I am going to have to put boxing in A tier. I do think it's slightly more effective than something like Sanda because we've simply have seen more evidence of boxing being more effective than Sanda. Um, and again, Sanda is one of those martial arts where we haven't seen a large enough sample size in MMA, specifically the UFC, to really justify it being anything higher than B tier at this point. Moving on, we have Taekwondo. Taekwondo, we've seen many examples of really amazing fighters who use Taekwondo techniques. Um, for example, the one that I had the pleasure of witnessing back in summer of last year was Joaquin Buckley, and he gave us one of the most spectacular knockouts we've ever seen in the entire history of the UFC. But the thing that really holds Taekwondo back from being in something like A or S tier is the fact that it's very easily neutralized. If you close the distance on a Taekwondo fighter, they can't do anything to you, simply because Taekwondo is a very kick heavy martial arts similar to karate, to the point where if you close the distance, because you need distance to kick someone, right? If you close the distance, you take away their best weapon. And that is where other martial arts such as judo or sambo or jujitsu really shine, is where you take away distance, right? And you close that space. So for that reason, I am going to have to put Taekwondo on the same level as karate, and I am going to have to put it at C tier. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that Taekwondo and karate are not effective martial arts, because they absolutely are. And these are some of the trickier fighters to face, simply because they can pull out really unexpected moves that you are not going to expect. But we again have seen the sample size of boxing, the sample size of jujitsu, the sample size of combat sambo. That entire Dagestan region has pretty much taken over the UFC, right? And all of them have a combat sambo background to some extent over the other. But then again, you have, fighters like Zabit Magomedsharipov, who really swears by and does a lot of Taekwondo type of moves, right? So it's absolutely not fair to put karate and Taekwondo in D tier, but I definitely don't think it has, a big enough sample size to justify putting it in something like B or A tier. So for that reason, it's going in C tier. Moving on, we have wrestling. Now, if we look at it statistically, no other martial art has produced as many champions in MMA than wrestling. Statistically speaking, it has the most champions. If you look at John Jones, Daniel Cormier, even Ilya Topuria here, who we have in A tier for boxing, his original base was Greco-Roman wrestling. And then he built an absolute clinic of a striking ability on top of that, because he believes that learning wrestling is actually harder to do than learning striking. And as a result, he picked up striking after building his base in Greco-Roman wrestling. It's produced the most champions statistically. We can all look this up. We all have access to Google. So for that reason, I am going to have to put wrestling in S tier. I don't think there's any debate here about that. Moving on, we have something like Tai Chi. Not much to say here. I mean, this is again, Chinese-based martial art that is really for old people. You know, it's I guess framed as a self-defense skill, but it's really for old people, or at least that's how it's marketed at this point, to keep them in shape, give them some semblance of understanding of basic self-defense techniques. But as far as MMA goes, to my knowledge, this has produced no champions. So this is absolutely going in D tier. Moving on, we have Muay Thai. Muay Thai is one of the necessary, absolutely necessary foundational skills you have to have in MMA. Muay Thai is one of those bases where I think it has an advantage over something like boxing in the sense that they have a better understanding of defending yourself from kicks. In boxing, if you slip in boxing the way you slip, um, or if you slip in boxing in order to defend strikes, like, a jab or a hook or a straight punch or a cross coming down the middle, if you slip the way you would slip in boxing, you were going to get head kicked. And that's one of boxing's major weaknesses in MMA. But I do think its strength counteract that. But this is where Muay Thai really shines because you get the same level of striking prowess. You have your knees, your elbows, your kicks, your punches, but at the same time, it incorporates the very same defenses to counter these attacks. You have your checks, you have the way you block kicks, and I've seen numerous examples of fighters not knowing Muay Thai and getting absolutely destroyed on the feet because they're getting torn up on the feet by these calf kicks, by these leg kicks. I mean, look at Carlos Prates in his recent bout against Jack Della Maddalena. And Jack is a boxer. At the end of the day, he's a boxer, you know, and he fell short to an absolute monster and nightmare of a Muay Thai specialist. So if we look at the overall balance that Muay Thai gives you, I think Muay Thai belongs in nothing less than S tier. Now, if you guys disagree, agree, let me know in the comments, and I would love to debate you guys. But other than that, those are my thoughts, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.